Business class? Are you sure you're sitting in the right seat?
Interesting, everyone else got served except me. Maybe economy class would be more comfortable for you.
Yes, tell the airline board meeting I'll join after landing.
Wait, she owns shares in this airline?
I'm so sorry, ma'am. Respect should never depend on appearance.
The woman in seat 2A asked for 1 glass of champagne, and 12 minutes later, the entire flight was no longer allowed to leave the gate. The silver tray moved slowly down the first-class cabin of Atlantic Crown Flight 718, catching the soft glow from the overhead lights as if every glass had been polished for a magazine cover. Outside the window, New York sat beneath a gray afternoon sky, the runway slick from a passing shower, while inside the aircraft everything looked expensive, quiet, and controlled. The leather seats were wide. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and warm bread. Passengers in tailored jackets checked their phones, adjusted their watches, and spoke in low voices as if the cabin itself belonged to them. Claire Whitmore, the lead flight attendant, moved through the aisle with the kind of smile that had been practiced until it no longer reached her eyes. She poured champagne for the man in 1A, then for the couple across from him, then for Victoria Lane, a woman in a cream blazer who accepted her glass without looking up from her tablet. Each pour was smooth, careful, automatic. Then Claire reached seat 2A and stopped. Ava Richardson looked up from the folder resting on her lap. She was a black woman in her early 40s, dressed in a plain black coat, dark slacks, and simple flats that looked comfortable enough for a long day of airports and meetings. No designer logo flashed from her bag. No diamond necklace announced her money. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her face carried the calm expression of someone who had learned long ago not to waste emotion on every insult placed in her path. Claire's eyes moved over Ava once, from her coat to her boarding pass tucked beside the armrest, then back to the tray. The pause lasted only a second, but in a first-class cabin, a second can be loud. Ava said politely, "May I have a glass, please?" Claire's smile tightened. "I don't think this service applies to you." The words were spoken softly, but not softly enough. The man across the aisle lowered his newspaper. Victoria Lane's eyes lifted from her screen. Somewhere behind them, a phone camera that had been filming the cabin lights slowly turned toward seat 2A. Ava did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She simply looked at the untouched glasses on the tray, then back at Claire. "I'm sorry," Ava said. "What do you mean by that?" Claire shifted her weight, still holding the tray between them like a polished silver wall. "Some passengers confuse first class with full-service privileges before the system confirms everything," she said. "It happens." Ava glanced at her seat number, then at the cabin around her, where every other glass had already been filled. The plane was scheduled to depart in 12 minutes. The door was still open. The engines were quiet. And Claire Whitmore had no idea that the woman she had just embarrassed was the one person on that aircraft with the power to decide whether Flight 718 ever left the ground. For a moment, no one moved. The first-class cabin held its breath under the soft hum of the ventilation system, and the champagne bubbles on Claire Whitmore's tray kept rising as if nothing had happened. Ava Richardson let the silence sit there. She had learned that silence could do something anger never could. It made people reveal themselves. Claire looked around and noticed the eyes turning toward her, so she made her smile brighter, cleaner, more official. "Ma'am, there is no need to make this uncomfortable," she said. "I am simply following our service procedure." Ava folded her hands over the folder in her lap. "I asked for the same thing you served everyone else." Claire gave a small laugh through her nose, the kind meant to sound polite but land like a warning. "And I am explaining that certain amenities require proper confirmation." Across the aisle, Victoria Lane leaned back in her cream blazer and gave the man beside her a look that said she had seen this kind of thing before. Then she spoke just loud enough for Ava to hear. "Some people really do think a seat number changes everything." A few passengers shifted in their seats. One man pretended to check his watch. Another stared down at his phone with sudden interest. No one wanted to be involved. That was how moments like this survived. Not because everyone agreed, but because too many people found comfort in looking away. Ava turned her head slowly toward Victoria, not with anger, but with a calmness so complete that Victoria's little smile faded before Ava said a word. Then Ava looked back at Claire. "Please show me the policy." Claire blinked. "Excuse me?" "The procedure you mentioned," Ava said. "If it applies only to me, I would like to understand it." The cabin grew quieter. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the tray. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. The performance had been challenged. "I do not have to debate company policy with passengers," Claire said. "Especially not before departure." Ava nodded once, as if filing the answer away. Behind her, in seat 3C, Brandon Miles had stopped filming the window view and now held his phone lower, angled just above his knee. He was a 27-year-old software consultant flying to Los Angeles for a conference, and until 2 minutes ago, his biggest concern had been whether the aircraft had wireless internet. Now he was watching something that made the expensive cabin feel smaller by the second. Claire took half a step closer. "I need you to lower your tone." Ava's eyebrows lifted slightly. She had not raised her voice. Not once. Even the man with the newspaper noticed that. Brandon's phone captured it all, Ava sitting still, Claire standing over her, the untouched champagne, the passengers pretending not to listen. "My tone is exactly where it has been," Ava said. "Then I need you to cooperate," Claire replied. "Because when a passenger becomes disruptive before takeoff, we have to consider the comfort and safety of everyone on board." That word changed the temperature in the cabin. Disruptive. It was soft enough to sound professional, heavy enough to damage someone. Ava had heard words like that before in hotel lobbies, boardrooms, private clubs, investor dinners, and airport lounges where people looked at her badge after they looked at her face. She knew what Claire was doing. Claire was not just refusing a drink. She was building a record. One careful sentence at a time. Ava looked toward the open aircraft door at the front of the cabin, where ground staff moved in and out with paperwork. Then she looked at her phone as it lit up beside her hand. 3 messages appeared on the screen. Board waiting. Los Angeles team confirmed. Final signature window closes at 4 o'clock Pacific time. Ava did not answer them immediately. She turned the phone face down, then looked back at Claire. "You should be very careful with the words you choose next." Claire's smile disappeared for the first time. "Is that a threat?" Ava shook her head. "No. It is an opportunity." Claire Whitmore stared at Ava as if the word opportunity had insulted her more than anger ever could. She was used to passengers reacting in ways she could control. If they shouted, she could call them aggressive. If they argued, she could call them difficult. If they cried, she could call them unstable. But Ava did none of those things. She sat in seat 2A with her shoulders relaxed, her hands still, and her voice so even that Claire could not find a single sharp edge to grab. That calmness made Claire feel exposed. So she reached for the one thing she trusted most, authority. "I am going to ask you one final time," Claire said, lowering her voice into the tone employees use when they want witnesses to believe they are the reasonable one. "Please remain seated, stop challenging the crew, and allow us to complete pre-departure service." Ava looked at the silver tray. "You stopped the service." Claire's jaw moved slightly. "Because I had a concern." "About my ticket?" Ava asked. "About your behavior," Claire replied. Brandon Miles, still recording from seat 3C, felt his stomach tighten. The difference between what had happened and what Claire was saying was so obvious that it almost felt unreal. Ava had asked for a glass. Claire had refused. Ava had asked for the policy. Claire had changed the subject. Now the word behavior was floating through the cabin like a label waiting to stick. Victoria Lane crossed one leg over the other and gave Claire a supportive nod, as if the situation had become a little courtroom and she had already chosen her side. Honestly, Victoria said, some of us have connections in Los Angeles and would appreciate leaving on time. Ava turned her eyes toward Victoria. So would I. It was a simple answer, but there was something underneath it that made Brandon glance at Ava's phone again. The screen lit up against the armrest. Another message appeared. Monica Hayes, the board is seated. Do we announce at closing? Ava read it, then typed with one thumb. Not yet. I am observing something. She turned the phone over before anyone could see more. Claire noticed the movement, but not the name. To her, it was just another passenger pretending to be important. She stepped toward the front galley, set down the tray harder than necessary, and picked up the interphone. Her voice became smooth again. Captain Pierce, I need you in first class for a passenger issue. The words traveled farther than she intended. A passenger issue. Not a service issue. Not a misunderstanding. A passenger issue. Within seconds, Captain Daniel Pierce appeared from the cockpit doorway, tall, silver-haired, wearing the calm expression of a man responsible for 182 people and a tight departure window. He looked first at Claire. Not at Ava. That was the first mistake. What is going on? He asked. Claire folded her hands in front of her uniform. This passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions and has become confrontational over beverage service. The cabin went still. Brandon's phone stayed steady. Ava looked up at the captain. Is that what she told you? Daniel Pierce finally turned toward her. Ma'am, I need to understand why there is a disruption before pushback. Ava studied him for a moment. She had seen this pattern too many times to be surprised by it. The person with the uniform told the story first, and everyone else had to fight their way back to the truth. Captain, Ava said, are you asking for the truth, or are you asking for the version that keeps your schedule clean? Daniel's face tightened. He was not an unkind man, but he was a busy one, and busy people often mistake speed for judgment. I am asking you to cooperate so we can get this aircraft out on time. Ava nodded slowly. Then you are not asking for the truth yet. Claire gave a small, disbelieving laugh. You see what I mean? Daniel raised one hand slightly, asking for quiet. Ma'am, I am going to give you a choice. You can accept the crew's direction and we can move forward, or we may need to involve gate security. The word security landed softly, but everyone felt it. Ava looked out the window at the wet runway, where another aircraft rolled past under the dull afternoon light. Then she looked at the open cabin door, the champagne glass Claire never poured, and the phone resting beside her hand. For the first time, her expression changed. Not into anger. Into decision. Captain Pierce, she said, picking up her phone, before you involve security, you may want to call your chief executive officer. Claire blinked. Victoria gave a quiet scoff. Daniel Pierce frowned. Why would I do that? Ava unlocked her phone and opened her contacts. Because in about 30 seconds, he is going to call you. Ava did not rush the call. That was what made the moment feel heavier. Her thumb moved across the screen with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided where the line was, and everyone around her seemed to sense that something had shifted, even if they did not understand why. Claire folded her arms across her vest and tried to look unimpressed. Captain Daniel Pierce remained beside the aisle, one hand resting near the bulkhead, his expression caught between irritation and caution. He had expected an upset passenger. He had expected raised voices, maybe a delay of 5 minutes, maybe a quick removal if things became difficult. He had not expected the woman in seat 2A to speak as if the entire aircraft were merely one small piece on a much larger board. Ava lifted the phone to her ear. Monica, she said calmly, pause the acquisition announcement. The words were quiet, but Brandon Miles heard them clearly, and his hand tightened around his phone. Claire heard them too, though she did not understand their weight. Ava listened for half a second, then continued. No, do not release anything to the press yet. Tell the board I need 10 minutes. Victoria Lane gave a soft laugh and turned toward the man beside her. People make the strangest calls when they are embarrassed. Ava's eyes moved to Victoria for just a moment, then returned to the aisle. She did not defend herself. She did not explain. She simply ended the first call and made a second one. This time, her voice became even quieter. Ethan, this is Ava Richardson. I am on Atlantic Crown Flight 718 at Gate B27. Pull the departure clearance and hold the aircraft at the gate. The cabin changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But something in the air tightened. Captain Pierce straightened. Claire's expression flickered. Even Victoria stopped smiling, because there are certain phrases people recognize even when they do not know the system behind them. Departure clearance. Hold the aircraft. Gate B27. Those were not the words of a passenger pretending to be important. Ava listened as the voice on the other end spoke quickly. Yes, she said. Immediately. And send airport operations to the aircraft. I want everything preserved exactly as it is. Claire stepped forward before she could stop herself. Ma'am, you cannot interfere with flight operations. Ava looked up at her. I just did. The sentence was not loud. That was the frightening part. It landed gently and still seemed to move through every row. Captain Pierce pulled out his own phone, his professional instincts finally waking up. Before he could unlock it, the cockpit interphone rang behind him. The sound was sharp in the silence, a simple electronic tone that made Claire turn her head as if it had called her name. Daniel looked once at Ava, then walked quickly toward the cockpit doorway and picked it up. Pierce. He listened. His face changed before he said another word. First confusion. Then disbelief. Then the color leaving his cheeks in a slow, visible wave. Yes, sir, he said. I understand. Claire watched him, her posture no longer firm. Captain. He did not answer her right away. He kept listening, his eyes fixed on the cockpit floor. No, sir. We have not pushed back. The door is still open. Another pause. Yes, sir. I will comply. He placed the interphone back into its cradle with careful precision, as if any sudden movement might make the situation worse. When he returned to the cabin, he no longer looked at Ava like a schedule problem. He looked at her like a person he should have recognized the moment she spoke. Ground control has withdrawn our departure clearance, he said, each word measured. A murmur spread through first class, then died almost instantly. Claire's lips parted. Because of her. Daniel turned toward Claire, and now there was something different in his eyes. Not anger. Alarm. Because this aircraft is being held pending an operational review. Victoria sat up straighter. That cannot be right. We have connections. Ava placed her phone gently on the armrest. So do I. At the front of the aircraft, two airport operations managers appeared at the open door, followed by a man in a navy suit moving with the brisk, controlled urgency of someone who did not need to ask permission to enter. Claire recognized him vaguely from internal training videos, but her mind refused to place the name. The man stepped into the first-class cabin, looked past Claire, past Daniel, past every stunned passenger, and stopped beside seat 2A. His voice was respectful and low. Ms. Richardson, I am Ethan Cole. Airport operations has secured the gate. The flight is officially on hold. For the first time since the champagne tray stopped in front of her, Ava stood. She smoothed the front of her black coat, picked up her folder, and faced the cabin that had spent the last few minutes deciding whether she belonged there. Thank you, Ethan, she said. Now we can discuss what actually happened. Ethan Cole did not raise his voice, but his presence changed the shape of the cabin. 2 airport operations staff remained near the forward door, not blocking anyone, simply standing where everyone could see that this was no longer a small disagreement between a passenger and a flight attendant. Captain Daniel Pierce stepped aside, his shoulders stiff, his eyes moving from Ethan to Ava and then to Claire, as if he were replaying every sentence that had been spoken since he walked out of the cockpit. Claire Whitmore looked at Ethan's badge, then at Ava, then back at the champagne tray sitting abandoned in the galley. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the tray had become evidence. "There has been a misunderstanding," Claire said quickly. Her voice still tried to sound professional, but the smoothness was gone. "I was following service protocol." Ava stood in the aisle with the folder tucked under one arm. She did not look triumphant. That somehow made the moment worse for Claire. A person seeking revenge might have smiled. Ava did not. She looked disappointed, and disappointment from someone with real power can feel colder than anger. "Then show us the protocol," Ava said. Claire swallowed. "It is not that simple." Ethan turned to her. "It should be very simple if it was used to deny service to a confirmed first-class passenger." A murmur passed through the cabin. "Confirmed." The word removed the last thin cover from Claire's excuse. Victoria Lane lowered her gaze to her tablet, but Brandon Miles kept recording, his phone steady, his face tense with the knowledge that the truth was now unfolding in real time. Captain Pierce cleared his throat. "Ms. Richardson, I want to apologize if my response added to the situation." Ava looked at him. "Captain, you heard one version and acted as if it was complete. That is not a scheduling issue. That is a judgment issue." Daniel accepted the words without defending himself, and the cabin noticed. Claire tried again. "She was challenging me in front of other passengers." Ava turned toward her. "I asked you to explain why everyone else received champagne and I did not." "You were making the cabin uncomfortable," Claire said. Ava glanced around the cabin, and several passengers immediately looked away. "No," Ava said. "The cabin became uncomfortable when people realized they were watching something wrong and did not know whether speaking up would cost them anything." The sentence landed heavily because it was true. Brandon felt it in his chest. The man with the newspaper slowly folded it and placed it in his lap. An older woman in seat 4A pressed her lips together as if regret had just reached her. Ethan opened a small leather notebook. "Ms. Whitmore, who authorized you to question Ms. Richardson's service eligibility?" Claire's eyes moved toward Daniel. Daniel's face tightened. "I did not." Ethan wrote that down. "Did the passenger's boarding record show any restriction?" Claire hesitated too long. "I did not check the full record." "Then what did you check?" Ethan asked. Claire said nothing. The silence answered for her. Ava stepped half a pace closer, still leaving space, still calm. "You checked my coat. My shoes. My bag. My face. And then you decided what I could not possibly be." Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, and Ava turned toward her with the same controlled calm. "And you," Ava said, helped make her feel safe doing it. Victoria's cheeks flushed. "I did not know who you were." Ava nodded once. "That is exactly the problem. You should not need to know who someone is before you decide to treat them with basic respect." At that moment, Ava's phone lit up again. Monica Hayes. Ava answered on speaker before anyone could pretend this was still ordinary. Monica's voice came through crisp and urgent. "Ava, the Atlantic Crown Board is asking whether the signing is delayed or cancelled. The Chief Executive Officer wants to know if this affects the acquisition." Claire's face went still. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Ethan lowered his notebook. The word acquisition moved through the cabin like a door opening onto a much larger room. Ava looked at Claire, then at the captain, then at the rows of silent passengers. "Tell the board the signing is delayed," Ava said. "Not because of champagne. Because I just saw the culture we were about to buy." Monica Hayes did not speak for 2 full seconds, and in that silence, everyone in the first-class cabin understood that Ava Richardson had not made an empty statement. Somewhere beyond the aircraft, beyond the wet runway and the sealed glass of Gate B-27, an entire boardroom was waiting on her decision. Millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, a struggling airline, a public announcement, and a rescue deal that had been planned for months were now paused because of what had happened in a cabin where one woman had been told she did not qualify for a glass everyone else received without question. "Understood," Monica said at last. "Do you want me to notify legal?" Ava looked at Claire Whitmore. Claire's face had gone pale, but Ava still saw the same thing she had seen from the beginning, not just fear of consequences, but confusion that consequences had arrived at all. "Yes," Ava said. "Legal, human resources, and the independent ethics team. I want a preservation notice sent immediately. Flight records, crew reports, passenger complaints, cabin camera timestamps, gate communications, and any prior service complaints involving this crew." Ethan Cole's pen stopped moving for a moment. Captain Daniel Pierce looked down. Claire inhaled sharply. "Prior complaints," she said. "There are no prior complaints that matter here." Ava turned toward her slowly. "That is an interesting way to phrase it." Claire realized too late what she had said. The cabin heard it too. Brandon Miles, still recording from seat 3C, felt the small hairs rise along his arms. Until that moment, he had thought he was filming a cruel mistake. Now it felt like he might be filming a pattern finally being exposed. Ethan looked at Claire. "Ms. Whitmore, are you aware of previous complaints?" Claire lifted her chin, trying to rebuild the professional mask that had carried her through years of polished service and private judgment. "Passengers complain all the time. They misunderstand policies. They take things personally." Ava's expression did not change. "People usually take discrimination personally." The word settled into the cabin with a weight no one could pretend not to feel. Victoria Lane looked out the window as if the runway had suddenly become fascinating. The man with the newspaper placed his hands together and stared at the floor. An older woman in seat 4A finally spoke, her voice small but clear. She did not raise her voice. Everyone turned. The woman swallowed, then continued. "Ms. Richardson asked for the same service as everyone else. That is all she did." Claire's eyes flashed toward her. "Ma'am, you may not have heard the entire exchange." "I heard enough," the woman said. Brandon lowered his phone slightly, surprised by the courage in that quiet sentence. Then the man with the newspaper spoke too. "I heard it as well. The flight attendant refused her before checking anything." Another passenger nodded. Then another. The silence that had protected Claire began to break apart, piece by piece, not with shouting, not with drama, but with ordinary people finally deciding that looking away had become its own kind of choice. Captain Pierce exhaled slowly. "Ms. Richardson," he said, "I should have asked more questions before speaking to you the way I did." Ava looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "You should have." The answer was simple, but it did not humiliate him. It gave him a place to stand if he was willing to stand in the truth. Daniel nodded. "I will include that in my report." Claire turned toward him, stunned. "Captain." Daniel did not look away from Ava. "And I will include that I relied on crew summary before verifying passenger conduct." Ethan made another note. Monica's voice came again through the phone. "Ava, the Atlantic Crown Chief Executive Officer is asking to speak with you directly." Ava glanced toward the cockpit, then toward the open door where airport staff waited. "Tell him he can meet me at the gate in 10 minutes. Claire's composure cracked. "You are canceling the flight over this?" Ava picked up the untouched champagne glass from the tray, looked at it for 1 second, then set it back down without drinking. "No," she said. "I am stopping a departure because your airline taught me something before takeoff that no financial report could show me." The untouched champagne glass sat on the tray like the smallest piece of evidence in the room, but by then everyone understood it had never really been about champagne. It was about who received courtesy without asking, who had to prove they deserved it, and who was believed the moment they put on a uniform and used the right tone. Ethan Cole stepped closer to Ava, keeping his voice low but clear enough for the front rows to hear. "Ms. Richardson, airport operations can arrange a private room at the gate. The Atlantic Crown executive team is already on its way from the corporate lounge." Ava nodded. "Good. But before I step off this aircraft, every passenger needs to be told the truth." Captain Daniel Pierce looked toward the cabin, then back at her. "The truth?" Ava's eyes moved across the first-class seats, past Victoria Lane's lowered gaze, past the man with the folded newspaper, past Brandon Miles and his still-recording phone. "Yes, Captain." Not a vague delay. Not weather. Not paperwork. "Tell them this aircraft is being held because a service incident raised serious concerns that must be reviewed before departure." Daniel absorbed the instruction. For years, he had made announcements in a calm pilot voice, smoothing turbulence with language, softening inconvenience into procedure. But this could not be softened without becoming another version of the same problem. He picked up the cabin microphone. The small click echoed louder than it should have. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Pierce speaking. We are currently being held at the gate pending an operational and service conduct review. This delay is not due to weather or mechanical issues. We will provide additional information as soon as it becomes available. Please remain seated while airport operations coordinates next steps." The announcement traveled through the aircraft, into economy, into rows where passengers had no idea that a quiet confrontation in first class had just changed their afternoon. Murmurs rose from the rear cabin, confused at first, then sharper as people checked their phones and looked toward the front. Claire stood frozen near the galley. For the first time, her authority had no place to land. She was still in uniform. She still had her name badge. But the cabin no longer leaned toward her version of events. Brandon finally lowered his phone. "Ms. Richardson," he said carefully, "I recorded most of it." Claire turned toward him so fast her name badge shifted against her vest. "Sir, recording crew members during active service may violate airline policy." Ethan looked at her. "Do not instruct him to delete anything." Claire closed her mouth. Ava turned to Brandon, her voice softer than before. "Thank you for not looking away." Brandon nodded, suddenly aware that his small decision to keep filming might matter more than he understood. Then a new figure appeared at the aircraft door, breathing hard as if he had walked quickly from the far end of the terminal. He was in his late 50s, wearing a navy suit and a tie slightly loosened at the collar. Daniel recognized him immediately and straightened. Claire recognized him a second later, and all the remaining color drained from her face. It was Richard Bellamy, Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Crown Airlines. He stepped into the cabin with two members of his legal team behind him, but his eyes went straight to Ava. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice careful, "I am deeply sorry for whatever occurred here." Ava did not accept the apology. "Not yet. Do you know what occurred here, Mr. Bellamy?" He hesitated. It was a tiny pause, but everyone saw it. "I have received a preliminary summary." Ava nodded. "From whom?" Bellamy's eyes flicked toward Claire, then Daniel, then Ethan's notebook. "From operations and the cockpit." Ava stepped into the aisle, holding her folder against her side. "Then let me give you the part summaries usually leave out. Your employee denied me service she had just provided to every white passenger around me. When I asked for the policy, she could not produce one. When I remained calm, she called me disruptive. When the captain arrived, he accepted her account before asking for mine. And when witnesses began speaking, we learned she may have prior complaints. The cabin was silent enough to hear the faint rain tapping the aircraft's skin. Bellamy's face tightened with the expression of a man watching a rescue deal slide toward a cliff. "Ms. Whitmore," he said slowly, "you are relieved from duty pending investigation." Claire's lips trembled. "Mr. Bellamy, I was protecting the cabin environment." Ava looked at her, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the kind of steady disappointment that leaves no hiding place. "No, Claire. You are protecting the kind of environment where people like me are expected to be grateful for being allowed in the room." Claire Whitmore had no answer for that, because the sentence reached deeper than the incident itself. It named the thing she had been trying to keep invisible. Richard Bellamy stood beside the forward galley, his legal team behind him, his face controlled in the way executives learn to look calm when everything is falling apart inside. "Ms. Richardson," he said carefully, "I want to assure you that Atlantic Crown takes these matters seriously." Ava looked at him. "Do you?" Bellamy opened his mouth, then stopped. It was not a question he could answer with a slogan, not with Brandon's phone still holding the truth, not with witnesses sitting a few feet away, not with Claire standing there pale and silent beside the untouched tray. "We will conduct a full review," Bellamy said. "A review is what companies promise when they need time," Ava replied. "Accountability is what they do when people are watching." The words moved through the cabin without needing volume. Bellamy nodded once, slower this time. "What are you asking for?" Ava glanced toward Ethan Cole. "First, this flight remains cancelled for today. Every passenger is rebooked, compensated, and given hotel accommodations if needed. No one on this aircraft should pay for a failure they did not create." A ripple went through the cabin. The anger from the back rows, which had been building in confused murmurs, softened as the message traveled. Ava was not punishing passengers. She was forcing the company to own the cost of its own culture. Second, she continued, "Ms. Whitmore is removed from passenger-facing duty pending an independent investigation. Not an internal memo. Not a quiet transfer. An independent investigation." Claire flinched at the word independent. Bellamy looked toward his legal team, then back at Ava. "That can be arranged." Third, Ava said, "Captain Pierce files a signed statement before leaving this aircraft, including the fact that he accepted one account before asking for mine." Daniel Pierce's jaw tightened, but he stepped forward. "I will do that." Ava turned to him, and for the first time, her eyes softened slightly. "That matters, Captain. Not because it fixes everything, but because truth has to start somewhere." Daniel nodded, and this time the gesture carried the weight of a man who understood the lesson had come too late but not too late to matter. Bellamy exhaled. "And the acquisition?" The question was quiet, but everyone in first class heard it. There it was. The real fear. Not the cancelled flight. Not the public apology. The deal. The lifeline. Ava looked down at the folder in her hand, the same plain folder Claire had ignored when she decided Ava did not belong. Inside were financial projections, labor protections, route expansion plans, and a rescue package designed to keep Atlantic Crown alive through the next year. "The acquisition is not dead," Ava said. Bellamy's shoulders dropped a fraction. Claire's eyes lifted as if she had been offered hope by mistake. Ava continued, "But it is no longer the same deal." Bellamy went still. "What does that mean?" Ava handed the folder to Monica Hayes, who had just reached the aircraft door with two members of Ava's team. Monica stepped inside, composed and sharp-eyed, already holding a tablet filled with revised notes. Ava spoke without looking away from Bellamy. "It means the price of this deal now includes culture reform. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees. Independent complaint review for the last 5 years. Public reporting of service discrimination claims. Passenger rights protections written into operating policy. And a new executive position with authority to stop retaliation when employees or passengers report misconduct." Bellamy absorbed each condition as if every word added another mile to a road he had no choice but to walk. "That will require board approval," he said. Ava nodded. "Then you should call your board." Outside the aircraft, rain streaked the windows in thin silver lines. Inside, the cabin felt less like a luxury space and more like a courtroom where no judge had been needed because the evidence had spoken for itself. Victoria Lane finally looked up. "Ms. Richardson," she said, her voice smaller now, "I am sorry. I should not have said what I said." Ava turned toward her. "No, you should not have." Victoria nodded, eyes lowered. Ava added, "But remember how easy it felt when you thought the room agreed with you. That is the part you need to think about." Brandon Miles stopped recording at last. His screen showed 23 minutes and 11 seconds. 23 minutes was all it had taken for a glass of champagne to reveal an entire system. By the time the passengers began leaving the aircraft, the rain outside gate B-27 had slowed to a fine mist, turning the terminal windows silver under the afternoon light. No one rushed at first. They stood, gathered their bags, and moved through the aisle with the careful quiet of people who had witnessed something they would be thinking about long after the inconvenience faded. Airport staff handed out rebooking cards. Customer service agents waited at the gate with hotel vouchers, meal credits, and apologies that sounded more sincere than the announcement that had first reached the back rows. Claire Whitmore was escorted off separately by a human resources manager, not in disgrace for the crowd to enjoy, but in accountability that no longer depended on whispers. Captain Daniel Pierce remained near the aircraft door with a signed statement in his hand. When Ava reached him, he offered it to Ethan Cole without being asked. "I wrote exactly what happened," Daniel said. Ava looked at him, then at the paper. "That is a start." He nodded. "I am sorry, Ms. Richardson. Not just for the delay. For choosing the easier version before I heard yours." Ava held his gaze for a moment. "The easier version is often the most dangerous one." Then she stepped into the jet bridge, where Richard Bellamy, Monica Hayes, Ethan Cole, and 2 members of the legal team were waiting. The terminal beyond them was no longer calm. Phones were out. Passengers were talking. Brandon Miles stood near the window, looking down at the video on his screen, unsure what to do with something that had started as a travel inconvenience and become evidence of a larger truth. Ava noticed him and walked over. "Do what you believe is right with it," she said. Brandon looked nervous. "It could go everywhere." Ava nodded. "Sometimes everywhere is where the truth has to go before people stop calling it a misunderstanding." 10 minutes later, in a private conference room overlooking the runway, the Atlantic Crown board joined by video call. Bellamy looked older than he had on the aircraft. The directors looked tense, some embarrassed, some calculating, all aware that the rescue deal they had expected to close that afternoon now carried terms they could not soften with public relations language. Ava sat at the end of the table, her black coat folded over the chair behind her, the revised agreement open in front of her. "You wanted capital," she said. "I am offering accountability with it. If this company wants to survive, it will not survive by teaching employees to polish silver trays while ignoring the dignity of the people they serve." No one interrupted. Monica sent the revised terms to every board member at once. Independent complaint review. Passenger equity protections. Mandatory training. Public reporting. Anti-retaliation oversight. A direct line from frontline misconduct reports to executive review. The room was silent until Bellamy finally said, "We accept the conditions." Ava signed only after every member confirmed on record. By evening, Brandon's video had reached more people than anyone expected. The clip of Ava sitting calmly while Claire called her disruptive spread across news feeds, business pages, and airport employee forums. But the part people shared most was not the cancellation. It was Ava's sentence at the gate, "You should not need to know who someone is before you decide to treat them with basic respect." 3 weeks later, Atlantic Crown announced the new reforms. Claire's investigation uncovered previous complaints that had been minimized, misplaced, or explained away. Some employees were disciplined. Others came forward. Captain Pierce volunteered to lead a training session about assumption, authority, and listening before judgment. And Ava Richardson still flew commercial when she needed to, still wore simple coats, still carried folders without logos. Months later, on another flight, a young flight attendant offered her champagne with a warm smile and no hesitation. Ava accepted the glass, looked out at the runway, and thought about how small moments reveal large systems. A drink had been denied.